Well, it's election day in the United States, and today we wanted to discuss what does Joe Biden and the incumbent president Donald Trump mean for the big tech. And joining me to talk about that is Ray Wang from Constellation Research, joining us all the way from California. Hi, Ray. A big event. Countdown is on. My first question to you is, big tech has gotten bigger and bigger during COVID-19. Is it so big that it doesn't really matter who the U.S. president is?
It's a great question. Here on election day, that is an important question as to where big tech is going to go. And so I think you have to look at it this way. At the macro level, the U.S. is competing with China, and they have to have scale. And given how big China is with AI and some of the technologies that they're automating through, the big tech giants in the U.S. have got to compete at that level. So I don't see a lot of regulation under Joe Biden or under Donald Trump, in any case, since there's a change in the election. But I do see a difference in terms of how they approach partnerships and what that means in terms of ecosystems around the world.
So you're basically saying that if the incumbent president Donald Trump wins, or even if it's the Democrats Joe Biden, either way, we're not going to see too many regulations.
We will see increase. We will see, questions about Section 230 in social media, where social media companies have protections from lawsuits. I think that will be investigated definitely if Donald Trump wins re-election. If Joe Biden wins, I think that will kind of be skirted, but there'll be questions around consumer protections. There'll be regulations on tech companies to do more around equality, around social justice, right? So you'll see that kind of nuance. But I think what won't change is the commitment to India and the ally and partnership with India versus China and Chinese big tech companies, because I think that is a crucial part of national security and global security.
Yeah, so basically, even if it's Joe Biden or it's Donald Trump, the expectation is that the relationship with India is only going to get deeper. Before I get into that part, Ray Wang, I want to ask you one question. You said if it's Joe Biden, he might skirt the Section 230. You've already started seeing the hearings. Just last week, we did see the big CEOs from Facebook, Twitter, Alphabet. They were all there for that hearing. But Joe Biden is also in favor of higher taxations. Donald Trump promised that he was going to make sure these companies paid tax, and it didn't happen in his first term. What about that and big tech?
I think there's a reluctance to handicap big tech in general in Washington. Part of the reason is because of the competitive angle, but there needs to be some regulations. And at this point, the benefits of big tech outweigh the costs. The benefits of free services, the benefits of advancements of technologies, the benefits to the consumer. Costs have gone down, access has improved, innovation has not been stifled. When those three things change, and I'm writing a book about that, when those three things change, we will see a different tone in Washington. But at this moment, it's a question of whether tech companies are media companies or not, or whether tech companies actually have to moderate and control, their behavior to actually, ensure free speech. That is where Section 230 is going to come and play a role.
And the higher taxes, is that just election rhetoric from the Democrats or from the Republicans promising to make sure that these big corporations do pay taxes?
I think the question has to come down to where those taxes are being paid, what the global tax regime is going to look like. I think if Joe Biden is in office, he'll try to assuage different allies about the tax rules and competition with the EU and competition with other areas. I think if Donald Trump wins, he'll continue his, war for free trade, fair access with allies. I think that's the difference. Joe Biden is probably going to treat allies differently, turn the other way to make sure that, they have favorable terms. Donald Trump just wants to make sure that everybody around the world is, paying their fair or equal share in his perspective.
Okay, that's a great point. But, when you look at the donations that have been made to the two parties, do the big tech companies prefer one candidate over the other?
It's a great question about donations and donations to one candidate. In general, the big tech executives have and the big tech employees have generally supported the Democratic Party much more than the Republican Party. But you have to understand that in this election, Donald Trump's average contributions is somewhere between the $60 to $62 range, which means he's got a lot of small-time donors. He hasn't taken money from the pharmaceuticals. He hasn't taken money from the big banks. He hasn't taken money in those traditional areas around big tech. And so for him, he feels he does not beholden to any of them. That's part of the allure for Donald Trump in terms of those who are voting for him.
And, I'm going to ask you one cheeky question, which is that if Joe Biden does become the next U.S. president, what is that going to mean for Jeff Bezos and Amazon? I'm asking this, as a reader of the Washington Post.
I think the Washington Post, which has been on an all-year campaign and probably a 4-year campaign against the president, I think they will be in celebration. I think if that happens, I think they've taken a very partisan stance. So I think that Jeff Bezos will breathe a sigh of relief, and we'll see what happens with President Trump. But it's too early to tell right now, as you can tell from where we are with the election polling. It is a very tight race. I think we're going to see a lot of excitement throughout the night. There are a couple of things that we have to take into account, right? There's a lot of mail-in ballots. Almost 98 million votes have been cast. This is unbelievable for an election. And so traditionally, people do mostly vote on election day. This election is different. The Democrats have done really well in terms of having early voting in many states. The Republicans have an amazing ground game. This is going to be very exciting to watch tonight.
Oh, absolutely. It's literally going down to the wire, isn't it? It is seeming like it's going to be a very, very close contest. Now, you brought up this very interesting point as well, and for our Indian viewers, that it doesn't matter whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, they're going to look to foster even deeper relations with India at the cost of China. Having said that, you've also seen the big tech actually increase their investments in India during the pandemic, during COVID-19. You've heard of those big investments that have been made. So when you look at that, is that the biggest market now for the big tech outside of US, at least from a focus point?
It's a great point. Look, India and the US have a very special relationship. India has rule of law. India has IP rights. India and America have worked very closely together over the last 3 to 4 decades, especially in technology workers, especially in building out the tech infrastructure. The technology market is so important here that we're going to see the world bifurcate between US versus China. There's Chinese standards, there's US standards. What we have to think about is the impact around the world. This is why the US has been working closer with India over the last 5 to 10 years, and this has been more apparent with Donald Trump. But I think over the next 5 years, and we're going to see that regardless of which president wins, because there is a growing belief that the Indian market is the next big market. It is a market that represents almost a quarter of the world's population, and that market is a free market. It is a democratically elected market. It is one that actually has a set of laws, a rule of laws, and an infrastructure, and that's something that American companies and Indian companies can agree upon.
And therefore, it wouldn't matter who the US president is that is elected, either way.
I think the only difference is that Donald Trump is a lot more it's more pro-American and anti-China at this moment. I think Joe Biden will be less anti-China and will try to find places for appeasement. Donald Trump believes that China is, from what we can tell, China is the biggest threat to the U.S. economy and the U.S. Dominance of the world. And so therefore, they're building the allies around it. But Joe Biden may have better skills around, diplomacy and bringing together coalitions as opposed to the transactional nature of our trade deals.
The other question I want to ask you, and with respect to the big tech companies, what you've also seen in the run-up to elections is perhaps the biggest lawsuit since 1998 for antitrust. It's against Google. There's been all this chatter about, is it time to start breaking up these companies? I don't know if this is the AT&T moment for big tech companies, but or is that something that is just not being taken seriously at the moment? Just look at the share price of these companies. It's been completely disregarded by the markets.
You're completely right. The markets basically do not assume that the big tech companies are going to be broken up. And even if they are broken up, separated as individual companies, their market caps will go up even higher. Right. So if there's a breakup, you win. If there's no breakup, you still win because it's the biggest game in town. Part of the reason is these digital giants have monetization models around 6 areas, and they're going after all 6, and they're also going after multiple business models in different industries. The 6 monetization models are ads, search, subscriptions, memberships, goods, and services. So while Facebook is, pushing after ads pretty hard, where Google's is doing search and ads, right? But they now also have cloud computing and some subscriptions, you start to see all this come together. And so while Google may be dominant in search, Facebook dominant in social, Amazon dominant in commerce and cloud, they're competing on all these areas at the same time. And that's why consumers have been able to benefit from that innovation, benefit from that competition.
So basically, then again, it doesn't matter whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. It looks difficult that they're going to be broken up, and if they do, they are indeed broken up.
There is one important issue where there's going to be a difference. That is the H-1B issue. Right? H-1B visas under Donald Trump are going to be much harder. And you can see that already given what has happened over the last couple of weeks. With Joe Biden, you'll see much more H-1B visas being allocated. So that is the biggest difference between the two.
Okay. And that, of course, from an Indian perspective is also going to be really, really important because we are one of the biggest recipients of the H-1B visa regime.
That is correct. You are the biggest recipients of the H-1B visas, and this means when workers are looking, big IT tech companies like the Infosys and the TCS and HCL and Wipro, when they're looking at their markets, do they staff more local? Do they bring H-1B visas in? How do they manage the mix? That becomes an important issue. The good news is that each one of these IT giants have done a good job hiring domestically and have built their pipeline domestically, so they're shielded. But it's still a question of how many H-1Bs can come through, and I see that as the biggest difference.
What about Twitter? For Twitter, it's going to be very important who the next president is going to be. I think part of Twitter's challenge is they have to figure out are they a closed platform, which I think they believe they have their platform, they make their own rules, and everybody can ignore what they think, and they don't have to follow any other rules, or are they media, right? And this is why the Section 230 rules become so important. So do they moderate their own content so that they're not liable, or are they open to all types of libel and lawsuits? And I think that decision is going to come to a head. If Donald Trump wins, I think Twitter was going to have to make some decisions about that. Every social media platform has to get there. What you've seen Facebook do, on the other hand, is say, look, tell us what the rules are. We're going to follow them. We'll help you craft the rules. We might not like all your rules, but we want to make sure there's defined standards so we know how we can grow. Give us the rules so we know what the guard posts are. And so I think you're going to see 2 different approaches to this problem. And Apple, because, it's already started to move manufacturing out of China.
So Apple has a different strategy here. Apple still sees China as an amazing market. It's a luxury market for its phones, just like India is a luxury market for its phones. They won't be the dominant provider in that space, but they're also going to grab a lot of revenue and growth in those areas. And so for Apple, they're walking a fine line, trying to balance the needs that are happening in China, as well as the needs of their American headquarters. And so you will see them, they'll continue to drive manufacturing in the U.S. where it makes sense, but they'll also drive local-based manufacturing as they're pursuing their green and sustainability initiatives.
Okay, I'm going to let you go after this one last question, and which is, Ray, that, we've learned a lot since 2016, at least the big tech say they have, the role of the big tech during the elections. Whichever way the results go, it's certainly going to be under the scanner. It's certainly going to be scrutinized.
The challenge of big tech in the elections is that they haven't necessarily behaved well. And I think if you're a Republican and you're on the GOP side, you've seen the suppression of information, the suppression of media stories like the Hunter Biden story. You've seen that, certain tweets for the president and officials have been flagged unnecessarily. One could call that bias in the media. I think it's really the different set of values that are here in Silicon Valley that do not react well to some of that information. And so what might be considered hate speech might be free speech. What might be considered as bias might be considered as, we're trying to level the playing field. I think that gap has grown in the US, and I think that's part of the challenge. There has to be a discussion about this. And since these platforms wield more weight, they wield more weight than media. Think about this. The number of views on social media platforms with 100 million active users is greater than most programs. And that's the challenge. And so I think we need to come up with a brand new framework for this.